why is government intervention important? We have talked about these two things, right? And then we looked at the maximum prices, maximum minimum prices, right? And today we'll build on that. Okay, now think about this. This unit 3, I hope you can see my whiteboard. Okay, this unit 3 that we are currently on is called government intervention in price system. Now, why does government intervene in the market? That is what price system means, market. Because government sees that there are a couple of things that are not happening in the most, equitable manner. Government intervention in price system. So if government sees that someone in the country is dealt unfairly, or the market outcomes are not fair, then that is when the government intervenes using different tools, indirect taxes, subsidies, which we'll cover in today's class, or through maximum or minimum prices that we have already covered, to achieve a more equitable distribution. So long story short, government intervenes in the markets, in the price system, to achieve more equitable outcome, right? Okay, and that is what unit 3 is, right? Okay, now so far we have talked about two things, right? We'll do a quick recap and then we'll build on that. So what is maximum price? So we started our discussion about what are some situations where the government will need to intervene. Do you remember? We did talk about this, that what are some situations where the government will need to intervene, right? One of those cases that we discussed was when people can't afford basic necessities, when poor people or people below a certain level of income can't afford basic necessities, that is a justified cause for the government to intervene, right? Okay, now that is where the maximum prices comes into play. Now, what is a maximum price? The idea is fairly simple and easy, and we're about to look at on a graph, right? So there's a normal market for any basic item, let's say food item, any basic food item, rice, wheat, anything of the sort, right? So on the y-axis you have quantity, on the y-axis you have price, on the x-axis you have quantity of that thing, quantity of, let's say, wheat, quantity of, let's say, whatever, right? Quantity of wheat on the x-axis, you have price on the y-axis. Okay, so there are two more students, let's admit them. Okay, now what else do you need to add to this graph is obviously the market equilibrium graph shows us the total supply for the product and the total demand for the good, right? So how much is the total supply? Students, let me give you a quick overview of what we're doing here, and then we will start. So one of you is not mute. May I request you? Okay, all of you, great. Okay, now students, think about this. We are doing a quick recap of what we did in the last class, right? And then we'll build on that. So this unit 3, which we are currently on in AS Economics, that's about government intervention in price system. Why do governments intervene in the price system in the market? Because the market outcome otherwise might not be equitable. Equitable means fair. We did talk about this. Then we listed a couple of different situations where you and I agreed that the government should intervene. For instance, the first scenario was that some people in a country can't afford basic necessities, basic housing, basic food, basic, stuff. Then the government should make a way around that, right? Government should provide a solution for that. And what's the solution? One possible solution of that is obviously there are income support programs as well. It's not that this is the only solution. Government can provide incomes to those poor people so that they can at least buy the basic necessities and stuff. But one possible solution around that is maximum prices, and that is what we're about to look at, right? Now, how do maximum prices operate? We did do this in the last class, but we are doing a quick recap. Break fast at 9 p.m., 4 p.m. in the evening. Okay, fine. Okay, let's keep moving, right? So students, think about this. Where the supply and demand for the good are equal, that is the equilibrium point. We know this, right? So the market equilibrium is where the total quantity produced is equals to total quantity demanded, right? So this equilibrium point will show you what? This equilibrium point E1 will show you the price of each unit of the good and what's the total quantity that will be traded in the market. As simple as that. So let's say this is the market for wheat as we have mentioned it on the x-axis, right? And the price of each unit of wheat is 100 rupees per kg. 100 rupees per kg, right? And the total quantity that, let's say, is being traded during a certain time is 500 kgs or 500 tons, whatever you want to think about it. Okay. And think about this. If government thinks that this price is too much, for people to afford, then the government would set a price level below the equilibrium price. And that is what maximum prices are, right? So maximum price is always imposed below the equilibrium, right? So it will be something less than 100 rupees per kg. I write this down as price max. I write this down as price max. And that would be, let's say, 80 rupees per kg, right? Or could be anything lesser than that, but let's assume it's 80 rupees per kg. Okay. Now, this being said, students, whenever the price is below the equilibrium price, that is where shortage will be created. Why so? Think about this. The straight horizontal line is intersecting with the market demand at this point. So let's bring this down and connect it to the x-axis. And let's say that this was a quantity of 600 kgs. Now 600 kgs of wheat are being demanded at this price level at 80 rupees per kg, and the total quantity that is being produced in the market at this price level is, let's say, 300, right? Now 600 minus 300 means that there is a shortage in the market, right? Why? Because you can see demand is greater than supply. So when demand is greater than supply, more people are demanding compared to what is being produced. There's a shortage in the market, right? So this is shortage. This is shortage. Now, to make sure, now this is the most important part, for government to make sure that the prices stay at this level. Because think about this, any price level apart from equilibrium price is not sustainable. Any price level on this graph apart from equilibrium price is not sustainable. No matter what, if there is price level anything other than this P1, right, which is the equilibrium price, the price will go back to the equilibrium level. Reason being, because obviously either there will be excess demand or there will be surplus, right? And on other price levels, demand and supply are never equal. So on this graph, apart from this point, where demand and supply of the product are equal, on other price levels, these are not. Okay. Now, if the government has made the rule that you can't sell any product for more than 80 rupees per kg, but then government has to do something about it so that the prices stay at this lower level. And what's the solution for that? Did we discuss the solution in our last class? We did, right? So the two possible scenarios or two possible situations to keep the prices at the lower level at 80 rupees per kg, either the government can import the product from other country, import wheat from other countries, right? Or provide subsidies. Yes. No. Subsidies we didn't discuss. The other one that we discussed was buffer stock. So buffer stock, subsidy could also be an option, but subsidy is a complete policy in its own. So we'll discuss this in today's class. Subsidies could also be the, I'll write this down, right? Because technically that's not incorrect, that's correct. But now we'll talk about subsidies in more detail, right? So think about this. To make up for the shortfall, either you can import this product from other countries, right? Or you can use buffer stock, right? So whatever stock the government might have maintained of wheat, might have, right? Not always, right? Might have maintained from previous year, the government can use that and sell and give this to consumers at a lower price of 80 rupees per kg. Easy. And then obviously the government can also give subsidies, which we'll focus on in today's class. So this is what maximum prices are. So maximum prices are to help consumers for products which are basic necessities and for which the government thinks that at the prevailing price level, a lot of people cannot afford. So to help them with that, the government imposes maximum prices. Easy, clear, good. Okay, let's keep moving. So let's keep moving. Now the second one is, what's the second one? Second thing that we started our discussion with but couldn't complete was minimum prices. Now minimum prices, as opposed to maximum prices, facilitate producers. Minimum prices facilitate or help producers, not the consumers, like maximum prices. How so? We'll look at it in a bit, right? So let's think of something. I build an entire story around this and I'll explain you again, explaining that why minimum prices are important, right? And think about this. I give you the examples of apples, right? Why apples? Because apple is not a fruit. For Pakistan, at least, might be the case for other countries. So we have very limited production of apples and in very selective areas of Pakistan, in the northern areas, right? Now, the people who are involved with harvesting or, growing of apples, apple farms, whatever those called, right? So they don't earn a lot of amount, right? Their incomes are not enough, and with that income they can't perhaps sustain their family and stuff like that. If these people over the years realize that growing apples is not very profitable, they're not getting much profit out of it, and things like that, then they will be discouraged and they will stop producing apples, right? And then it means that Pakistan will be producing no apples at all, right? The government doesn't like it. It should not happen. Blah 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 blah. So to help these people, right, farmers or producers, the government will provide minimum prices. How will that help? That's what I'm about to explain you. That's what I'm about to explain you. Okay, think about this. Now you have market supply, upward sloping, like always, market demand, downward sloping, like always. Easy. Where the two intersect, that's the equilibrium price. So let's say currently each kg of apples sells for 500 rupees, right? Equilibrium price currently is 500 rupees per kg of apples, right? How much total quantity being produced and sold in the market? I don't know, 10 tons, right? 10 tons, let's say. Oh, now 10, right? T for tons. Okay. Now to help farmers, to help, producers who grow apples, and knowing that 500 rupees per kg right now is not a fair compensation for the product, the government will set a minimum price higher than this. The government will set a minimum price higher than this. Think about it. So government will make a rule policy that no apples, so I'm writing down price minimum, right? No apples in Pakistan can sell for anything less than this. And let's say the government sets the price to be 700 rupees per kg, right? So instead of 500, the government is setting it to be 700 rupees per kg. So this is the rule that the government has made. Now, no, this is called price floor. John, this is called price floor. Maximum price is known as price ceiling. I'll tell you why is that ceiling in this floor. I mean, this is always confusing. I remember being a student that it was always confusing, but now I figured out a way how to remember it. I'll come to that part in a minute. Just give me a minute. Okay. Now, minimum price min, government has set above the equilibrium price. You can see that's 700 rupees per kg. Okay. Now, at this price level, you can see for yourself that this price is intersecting with the market supply. At this level, you bring the dotted line down. And you connect it to the x-axis. So let's say this turns out to be 15 tons. So 15 tons in the supply is the supply of apples in the market at this price level. And this price is intersecting demand at this level. So what you do simply is to bring the dotted line down to the x-axis, right? And let's say this turns out to be 80. What is 80? The demand at this price level, right? So this much is the demand at this price level and this much is the supply. When supply is greater than demand, what is that called? You guys remember? When supply is greater than demand, that's known as surplus or excess production. Surplus meaning more supply, more is being produced compared to what is being demanded. Surplus or excess production. Now, again, if the government wants the price to stay at this level, if the government wants the price to stay at this level, higher than the equilibrium, then government needs to buy the surplus. Exactly. A government needs to buy the surplus. Students, are you getting me? Because what will happen if government doesn't buy the surplus? Then obviously the price level will drop again. The price level will drop again and you'll come back to the equilibrium price. Why? Because supply is greater than demand. So when something is more available in the market compared to how much it's being demanded, then prices drop down. Simple rule, right? Simple rule of prices, right? Exactly. Yes, I'm coming to that, right? Now the government will buy the surplus output. So 15 minus 8 is how much? 7. So government will buy the excess production of 7 tons of apples, right? And then the government will either sell this additional, 70 apples to consumers themselves, right? Or they will stock it for the future year, which I don't think so is very much possible in a product like apples, but they will sell at that price. But since, are you getting me? So since, government is buying that output and that is not made available in the market for prices to drop, so the price level will stay at higher level of 700 rupees per kg. Zohan, Khatija, Khizr, did you guys get this, right? So since government bought, because if the government wouldn't have bought this surplus, then obviously the prices would have gone down to the equilibrium level. But now when the government buys, And when the government sells, then obviously the market prices will not drop, because government would make this rule that prices would only be 700 rupees per kg. So whichever factory, whichever consumer wants to buy that, it would be at 700 rupees per kg. Um, no, no, no. It can. I mean, technically, government can sell it for cheaper price. That's a very good question. That's a very good question, Zohan. So government can technically sell that at something less than 700. So who will face the burden of this thing? Obviously, the government. So government is buying for 700, but selling for something less. Government can do that. But sometimes the government might even think of selling it only at higher prices, right? Does it make sense? So if the government takes the hit on itself, then it will buy high, it will buy expensive and sell cheaper. So who's taking the hit? The government, you know that. On the other hand, the government can buy expensive and sell expensive. Then who's taking the hit? Who's taking the hit? Who's taking the hit? Consumers, right? But at higher price, there is no demand. No, 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 no. When? Think about it. Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah, yeah. So I got your point. Yes. So the government, if there's no local demand, the government will export it. Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. My bad. My bad. Yeah. So I didn't mention that part. I totally got what you're saying. So obviously there's limited demand at this much price in Pakistan. So the government can either sell it at a lower price in Pakistan if it wants to sell in Pakistan, or else the government can buy that expensive and export it. Most of the time, it's the export that happens, right? Um, so what will the government do? Buy the surplus, right? And then government has two options: either to sell it cheap in Pakistan, because in Pakistan people are not willing to pay a higher price. Sorry, let me write this down. Sell cheap in Pakistan, or export at a higher price to other countries, right? Does it make sense? Export it to other countries on higher price. Any confusion so far? Anything that any one of you did not understand? Khatija, Khizr especially, right? Is making sense, right? Right? So this minimum prices that we've just discussed is to help the producers. These minimum prices is there to help the producers. Okay, if you just give me a second, I'll be with you. Good, students? Is everything clear? Can you keep moving? Okay. So today we are starting off with another very important topic, which is indirect taxes and subsidies, right? Now, as said, in this entire unit, we'll talk about all the ways, or most of the ways, not all, because obviously that would be beyond the scope of our syllabus. We'll talk about ways how the government improves market outcome. If the government think that there is something that is unfair or that is not very equitable, then government intervenes and achieve a more equitable outcome for the market. That are and how government achieves that. That is what we are discussing in this unit. So the first two examples that we discussed were maximum and minimum prices. Now we're proceeding to indirect taxes and subsidies. Okay, now first let's talk about indirect taxes. What's an indirect tax, right? I did explain you in unit 1 as well a little bit, but I'll explain you again. So indirect taxes are basically the tax on consumption and production. Right now, why am I saying both? Because I'll tell you how that works. Any tax on consumption slash production, right? Now think about this. There are two types of taxes: direct and indirect. Consumption slash production. Now, one type of taxation, which is direct taxation, that simply works as how much is Mr. X earning per month. Some percentage of that has to be given to the government, right? So if Mr. X earns this much per month, right, then 10% of this, which is 10,000 rupees, will be paid to the government in the form of taxes and so on, right? So this is direct tax on the source of income, right? Property tax, income tax, wealth tax, right? These are direct taxes because they are on the source of income, where the money is coming from. Getting me? Getting me, students? Okay. On the other hand, when a tax is on the consumption or production slash production, that's an indirect tax. Why would government impose an indirect tax? I mean, there are a couple of reasons for that, but in our case, what you need to understand, if there is something that the government wants to discourage people from, if there is a harmful product, do you remember we talked about demerit goods, right? So if there is a demerit good and the consumption of which especially is increasing a lot, then the government will try to discourage that product by imposing an indirect tax, right? By imposing an indirect tax, right? Demerit goods include a couple of different things. Um, right? Could be cigarettes. Cigarettes are in fact demerit goods. Then you can have alcohol. Then you can have, junk food. As per the research, it's not very healthy and stuff like that, right? So these are some of the things on which the government can impose indirect taxes. Now, the irony is, the unfortunate part is that it's not only these demerit goods on which you find indirect taxes. In any country, you will see that indirect taxes are imposed on a couple of different things, even on basic food items. When I go to shop to buy, toothpaste, toothbrush, that's not a demerit good, but even then there is on that product, there is GST, general sales tax, right? I mean, why does government impose indirect taxes on those products? That's a story for another day. Okay, weapons. Think about this. You can, yeah, in countries where where these are legal. That's a good question. So Zohan is saying if weapons can be considered demerit goods. Yes, in USA, weapons will be demerit goods. In Pakistan, India, and countries like these, it will be an illegal thing, right? I mean, in most cases, because getting, I don't know how good are I mean, they're not implemented very strictly, but countries like these have not legalized weapons like is the case in US. But yeah, definitely, no matter what country we talk about, these will be demerit goods. But I think that there should be more strict regulations and rules around demerit goods, right? Sorry, more strict rules against weapons, right? I was reading a very interesting, research, and that said that gun violence is highest in USA and gun violence is lowest in Japan. So every year, hardly 2 to 3 people die in Japan due to gun violence. And there's only one simple explanation to it. There's no rocket science. I mean, if everyone gets to hold guns, you can't argue that people are sober, people would know, people are mature, people will control their emotions. No. I mean, just think about this. If you're giving them such a dangerous thing, which they can own legally, there would be a lot of stupid people out there who can use that weapon against other people, right? The only way you can stop gun violence in any country is to not let people own guns. Are you getting me? So that's what Japan has done. Right, exactly, right? So the gun violence, the number of people who die even in schools in US is insanely high, right? Why? Because a kid brings his or her parents' gun to school, and I mean, mass shooting. Can you imagine? We're living in what year, what time of the world we're living in? I mean, that's a long debate. They say personal freedom, right? Personal choice. That's what I was explaining you the other day, right? And that's the worst thing a country can do to itself. Forget about it. Okay, now we go down this, students. So that's what you need to do. So that's was the point that I was trying to make over here, right? Yeah. So that's what they say. Okay. So where were we? Yeah. So I will not include weapons over here because obviously they are merit good, but I think that there should be more strict rules and regulations around weapons. So let's keep demerit goods to simple things. Cigarettes harmful. People overconsume alcohol harmful. people overconsume. Junk food, harmful, people overconsume. So you need to stop them from doing that. Okay. Now, how will indirect taxes help you? It's a normative statement. Yeah, that's definitely my opinion. That's definitely my opinion. But the first research that I shared, that was positive statement. So if uh, weapon related deaths in Japan are lowest, and if weapon related deaths are highest in USA, then that's definitely a positive statement, because that is showing. And if there's a close coincidence, if there's a close, not coincidence, sorry, my bad, if there is a strong correlation, you know what correlation is? Correlation is one variable causing the other, right? So if I can plot these two values, gun ownership in USA, right, and the number of deaths due to guns in USA, right? Deaths per year due to guns, right? So you will see, right, this relationship, right? It's going up. More the gun ownership, obviously more the deaths, right? So this correlation would explain me that we need to control this thing because this is causing this thing, right? Got it? Good, easy. Can move on. Okay. Now, how will indirect taxes affect or control the market? That's what we're about to look at. How will indirect taxes control demerit goods or discourage people from demerit goods? That's what we are about to look at. So you have price on the y-axis, you have prices on the y-axis, you have quantity demanded of that product, quantity of cigarettes, right? Okay, have a look at this. Now, normal demand supply, the first thing that we draw on any graph, we know this, right? Sorry about that. So the normal demand supply will be drawn, right? Upward sloping is your supply, downward sloping is your demand, right? So before government intervened in the cigarettes market in Pakistan, let's think of Pakistan, right? Downward sloping was demand, right? This much was the quantity demanded of cigarettes in the market. This much was the quantity produced or supplied in the market for cigarettes. Where the two are equal, that is obviously the equilibrium point. That shows you equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. Confusion, students? We good so far, right? This is the equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. Now let's take some specific values over here because this will help. Just give me a second. Now let's take some specific values here, students, so that we can better understand what's coming up next. Okay, now let's assume each packet of cigarettes in Pakistan at the moment, I guess, let's assume, right, is 150 rupees, right? Is 150 rupees per kg. So it's not kg, what I'm saying. It's 150 rupees per packet of cigarettes in Pakistan, right? How much quantity is bought and sold in Pakistan each year? I have no idea, but let's say 5 million. I don't know, right? 5 million packets of cigarettes are bought and sold in Pakistan during a certain month, during a certain year, could be anything. And each packet of cigarettes is 150 rupees. Are we clear on this? This is the prevailing equilibrium in the market. The government wants to discourage use of cigarettes by imposing indirect taxes. How will that operate? That's what we're about to look at. Okay, now government says, now GST, general sales tax, this is an indirect tax, right? General sales tax is an indirect tax which is imposed on production and consumption. Now it could either be, now listen to this carefully. Now this GST could either be specific amount, it could either be a specific amount per unit, or it could be percentage of the selling price. It could be percentage of selling price, right? Now think about this. Either the government can say that on every packet of cigarettes, regardless of how much is the price of the packet, because different brands have different prices, right? We will charge 20 rupees in taxes. So if the government says this thing, then it will be option A. Specific amount per unit means that regardless of whether it's Benson and Hedges or whether it's, you know, Marlboro or whatever the different brands are, right? We will charge 20 rupees on each. We'll charge 20 rupees on each. Don't worry, we'll continue, right? We'll charge 20 rupees on each packet. That is specific amount. And if the government says that we will charge 20% of the selling price, then that is the percentage of the price. Right? Easy. Any confusion about this? Anything that any one of you did not understand? 52 billion cigarettes were sold. Billion, but these are not, yeah, these are not the packets. But yeah, I got your point. Thank you. So 52 billion, if I do some quick maths over here, each packet has 20, 20, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Where did you read this? Zwan? Divided by 20. So that makes, oh my God, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That makes 2,600 million. That makes, in fact, 2.6 billion packets. Whoa, that's some good research, guys. Good, good on. 2.6 billion packets a year. Whoa, that's crazy. And that was back in 2017. Um, right, yeah, yeah. Um, Great. Okay, let's keep moving, students. But people, it's high time that people should realize that it's very harmful, especially the young generation should know that, right? I know a couple of people who quit it over years. I'm one of them. I'm very proud of it and happy about it. But yeah, there's definitely more need for awareness and stuff like that, which governments are always doing, but I mean, who knows? Okay, let's keep moving, students. Let's keep moving. Okay, now let's first talk about the specific amount and then we'll talk about anything is possible in this life, trust me. Okay, so specifically, obviously you need to have build your strength and you need to right handle with it, right? But there are other ways. There's nicotine gum. This is not a class about that, right? But we can talk about this separately. Okay, now specific amount is basically when you impose 20 rupees of tax on each packet, right? That's specific amount. So regardless of what the selling price of the good is, 20 rupees per packet. Now, what that will do, students, now listen to this. When I said that tax on production slash consumption, I said, what is an indirect tax? So tax which is imposed on production slash consumption. Now, it will always, indirect taxes will always affect both. Indirect taxes will always affect both. Why? Because some chunk of indirect tax will be paid, some proportion of indirect tax will be paid by consumers, and some proportion of indirect tax will be paid by producers. So it's not that whenever indirect tax is imposed, only one of the two parties is affected. No, both consumers and producers are affected. Now, how the process works, this is very important, and I want you to pay close attention. So companies, right? Tobacco producing companies, right, will have to pay tax when they produce cigarettes, right? So if government has imposed tax, whatever amount, whatever percentage, so production companies will pay the tax to the government upfront when they produce tobacco, when they produce cigarettes. Then later on, tobacco companies will recover some chunk of that tax from consumers, right? How will they recover? Because they will transfer the burden to consumers in terms of higher prices. How many of you got this? Right? How many of you got this, students? This thing that I explained here, that the burden of indirect tax is split between consumers and producers, right? It's split between the consumers and producers. But before consumers buy the product, oftentimes, even before consumer goes to a shop to buy a packet of cigarettes, right? Right? The tobacco companies have already paid a chunk of that tax, right? Right? And then when consumers buy that, obviously they are paying some of that tax burden. They're paying some proportion of that tax by paying back to the tobacco companies because they have increased the price. They have included the amount of tax, some proportion of amount of tax in the price of that product, right? This is how it works for any indirect tax. This is how it works for any indirect tax. When the product is produced, which has an indirect tax, the producer pays the tax to the government, right? When a company produces a good, which is a demerit good on which an indirect tax is imposed, the company will pay the tax to the government, and then the company will transfer the burden to the consumer so that they can recover some proportion of that tax, right? Easy. Okay, nothing about this. How will this be shown on the graph? Now, this is the main part, students. How will this be shown, indirect tax be shown on the graph, right? So when cost of production increases, your supply curve shifts left because cost of production, as I just explained you, that who are the first ones, which of the two parties, the first one to pay the tax to the government, obviously the producers, right? So their cost of production has increased. Now they're not only paying for the labor wages, they're not only paying for the rent, they're not only paying for the electricity where tobacco or cigarettes are being produced, they're also paying the cost of tax. They're also paying the tax to the government, which increases their cost of production. So supply curve has to shift leftwards, because we know that one of the factors that affect supply is cost of production. Higher the cost of production, lower the supply, and vice versa. So supply of cigarettes shifts to left. Easy? Anyone not clear? Any confusion so far? Now is coming the main part. Now have a look at this. Now, where the new supply curve intersects with the demand curve, that is the new price that consumer will pay. Okay, by the way, I did not take this. Now I'm explaining. So we are assuming that government has imposed 20 rupees tax per pack, per unit, right? 20 rupees. So first we are looking at this example with the specific amount, then we come to the percentage of price example, right? Now, for this example, we are assuming that government has imposed a tax of 20 rupees per packet, per unit, right? Easy? Good? Okay. Now, excuse me. Where the new supply curves intersects with the demand curve, that is where the new equilibrium price will be. Yes or no? Do you agree with it? Okay. Now, this is PC, the price that consumer pays. This is PC, the price that consumers pay. Now, in this case, I'm assuming that consumers pay 10 rupees out of this 20 rupees. Consumer pay 10 rupees out of this 20 rupees. And who is paying the remaining amount? Think about this. What you will do, this was original equilibrium E1, this is new equilibrium E2. You bring a dotted line down from the new equilibrium to the old supply curve. You bring a dotted line down from new equilibrium, like I've done over here, new equilibrium down to the original supply curve, which is S1, and then you connect it to the y-axis, and then you connect it to the y-axis, and then see, and then you see that how much price will producers get. Or let's put it down in another way. A consumer went to shop to buy cigarettes, right, on which the government has imposed 20 rupees tax per unit. Now producers have kind of increased the price to 160 rupees instead of previous price to 150, because now they are also paying taxes on the product. So they have increased the retail price, the final price that the consumer has to pay for each packet, 160 rupees, right? Now, when a consumer walks into the shop, buys a packet of cigarettes, pays 160, not the previous price of 150. Now, this is not the total amount that is going into producer's pocket. That's not the total amount. That's not the net amount, if I have to say it like that. That is going into producer's pocket. Why? Because out of this thing, 20 has to go to the government, right? The 20 has to go to the government, right? So technically, how much money actually goes into producer's pocket? How much money actually goes into producer's pocket? Did you get my point, students, or did not? Right? So 140 rupees goes into producer's pocket, right? 140 rupees goes into producer's pocket. So this is the amount of tax. 160 minus 140, the government is getting 20 rupees per packet. The government doesn't care who pays. The government doesn't care who pays, right? Sometimes we'll see in a bit moving forward. Okay, if the class ends, you have to join through the same link. If the class ends, you have to join through the same link, right? Okay, now the government doesn't care who pays, right? Got it? Right? And we will see. Now, this brings us to another very interesting concept that I'll continue when you come. Okay, let's join again. Let's join again before the class ends.